Welcome to another episode of Speaking with the Senator. I'm Senator Kevin Avard, and today we have a special guest talking about a particular subject that really will affect many people, and most likely you know somebody that has been affected with Alzheimer's or dementia of some sort. They made me the chair of a subcommittee on this basic topic, and one of the things that we want to make sure is that the public understands where they can get help, what are some of the signs. And with that, I'd like to welcome Kathy Avard to the show. And I really appreciate you coming and talking about this.
Thank you.
You know, it seems every day I run into more people that are struggling. A friend of mine just recently called me, and then his wife followed up with a phone call saying, hey, by the way, you know, so-and-so, he has early signs of dementia. And it's like, wow, what's going on?
Well, it is a public health epidemic of our time. I know we thought that's what we got with COVID, but this has been going on for a while. Mm. So if we think about what that really means is that we have about 6.7 million folks who are suffering from some sort of dementia in the U.S. Mm. And we have about 28,000 right here in New Hampshire. Now, what that really means is that when you get a dementia diagnosis, I always sort of describe it as it's not just the individual that gets it, but it's the entire family gets the diagnosis. Right. Their lives are changed forever, both physically, emotionally, economically. So it's a very important step in a family's life, and unfortunately, one of the greatest or the most important risk factors for dementia of any kind, and there's several, in fact, besides Alzheimer's, is aging. And here we are in New Hampshire. We either win the title of either the second or the third most rapidly aging population. So we're going to be out front for the entire nation. We are going to be one of those states where we are confronting the realities of dementia as communities, as families, as a state. So it's beholden on all of us to know what this is about, what we can do as individuals, and what we can do as persons who want to make sure that we are taking care of our loved ones, but also we're taking care of ourselves and our own brains.
Right. Yeah. You know, it's interesting today. I got myself a haircut. Congratulations, everybody. Right.
Looks good.
And I was mentioning this to the barber, and he said, yes, we went through the same struggle, both my parents. And what we did is we took turns. And family members would take turns. So when you say that it doesn't affect one person, it affects a multiple layer. And then when it became too much, they went into, I think it was the Merrimack County Nursing Home of some sort. So there's another area where it affects even the local taxpayers that have to take care of that, and caregivers. And so as the population is increasing with this syndrome, if you will, or disease, it affects everybody, and hopefully our committee can figure out ways to inform individuals. You had a story about your journey with this.
Yes. The way I describe this is that this is the party that nobody wants to be invited to. Mm-hmm. The dementia journey. And my story has to do with my husband, Andrew Avard, who lost his job. We didn't know he was sick. He was only in his 50s. And dementia is hard to pin down. Employers are not necessarily, so when you say this is a community issue, it's definitely a community issue. All of us in the workforce and the community need to know what we're looking at and be better at identifying this. But my story is that there were subtle changes that I, as a spouse, was not even aware of. And suddenly he'd lost a job that he was really good at and that he loved. And there was no explanation. So here he is, a man in his 50s. And it took us about 9 months of then seeking medical help. What's going on? And that began our dementia journey, where they did the first cognitive testing to say, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. And it took us another 18 months, almost 2 years to get a definitive diagnosis. Our story is not unusual. It's a very elaborate and long-term process to get a diagnosis, but in the days that we were doing it, there was no treatment and there was no cure. There's still no cure, but things, even as of last year, are quite different. And so now there are actually treatments that are available that can prolong the good period. In other words, they can deflect the increase of disease and you get more good years out of this. So the trick is, though, you have to be diagnosed. You have to get diagnosed in time to get that window.
And that in itself can be a struggle. I mean, who wants to go and get diagnosed for that?
Well, let's think about this. To me, the issue is there are lots of parallels that make some sense. When you had no recourse, there was nothing that you could do to affect your outcome, then maybe it's understandable you would rather just put your head in the sand and not think about it.
Right.
But if, as is the case now and has been so for about a year, there are actually treatments that are now actually Medicare approved and they are insurance covered if you are eligible, to delay the progression of disease. What it would have meant for my family is I had young children. My children would have had maybe a few more years to get to know their father. And we would have had more time to get our house in order, financially and other ways. So it's like any disease. You would want to be able to prolong the period as long as you possibly could of the good days. And this is just the beginning. So in other words, we have our research in the last decade has essentially quadrupled in terms of funding and in terms of outcome. So we now know things about not only identifying and diagnosing dementia and developing treatments we had no idea 5 years ago, 10 years ago. It's really moving fast. So now is not the time to sit on the sidelines. Now is the time to say, I want to take responsibility for knowing what the status of my brain health is. I want to protect it, just like I protect my heart health. And I'm an active participant in my health as it pertains to my brain.
So, what are some of the testing? How does that go? I mean, how does if somebody thinks, well, I keep forgetting things, maybe I should get it tested. What are the tests like?
So, I think if we do nothing else today, other than to let people know that if you are Medicare eligible, meaning you're 65 or over, then you already have programmed into your annual wellness visit with your provider 100%. It's already embedded in there. They are supposed to ask you about your cognitive function.
Okay.
Very, very simple tests, just a few, association and memory tests and so forth, and to ask you and to say to you, how's it been going? Do you notice any changes? Now, it's a two-way street. The doctors or the primary carers can ask, but also the patient can volunteer. And so much stigma has been associated with this disease
I was going to ask you about
that a lot of people have sort of sat on their hands that I don't want to go there. I just don't want to go there. If you knew that by going there, and you're going there early to say, maybe I have a problem, maybe I don't have a problem, but let's find out. Just the same way I want to keep track of my heart health, then you might have access to something that would really help you.
And your family.
And your family, exactly. Nobody wants to do this.
Years ago, and it's sad, but if your child had Down syndrome, it seems to me that they were put away in a closet.
Yeah.
Or if there's, if somebody was suffering from dementia, they were just kind of put out. And you suffer in silence. And that really is now you look back and you think, wow, how cruel. Because people are embarrassed, but there's nothing to be embarrassed about. This is just a stage in life that some people go through earlier, some than others. But the stigma shouldn't take precedence over the family and the people that are in the wake of the diagnosis, it would seem. So there are places to get help, and I think we have something on the lower banner, but one of the things that we want to make sure is that people are aware that there is help, And early diagnosis is one of the things that we can do.
Yeah.
So I saw something, and it did say that by 2025, we'll have about 32,000 in New Hampshire alone.
In New Hampshire alone. But here, how about this one? By 2050, we're at 6.7 million now in 2023. By 2050, nationwide, we'll have more like 14 million. Now think about that. You already talked about the ramifications of this. This year, in 2023, as a nation, we are spending about $345 billion on Alzheimer's related, and that's all the dementias, related expenses. That's coming out of our tax dollars, it's coming out of our economy, out of our budget. If you fast forward to 2050, if we don't slow these things down, we're talking about a bill of $1 trillion a year. So it is really, we're motivated. We got to be motivated to support research, to get some answers, to reduce the incidence. We have to do the things that we can do to protect our brain health. And we have to find ways in the meantime with those families who are suffering this. We have to support those families and caregivers. And that's where I'm a volunteer for the Alzheimer's Association. And why is that? Is because what I found in my experience is that they were there. They provided help, they provided care, they provided support and education, in addition to the research that they do, in a place where very few others did. And it was all free. And it was 24/7. The number that's on the byline here, that is a 24/7 line that is staffed by specialists, people who are trained to answer any question. And believe me, I know. I've been on that line at 2 a.m. in the morning. There is no question you can't ask. From something as simple as, how do I discourage driving? I think my loved one we need to get the keys out of their hands. To, how do I handle incontinence? To, I'm going for a diagnosis tomorrow. I fear, what are the questions I should be asking my caregiver? Or how do I access support? Or what do I do with my family? I have my siblings and I don't see eye to eye in all of this. What are some strategies I could use? To education programs that the Alzheimer's Association use that, again, I make freely available to anybody on social media, on Zoom, on telephone, and in actual in-person meetings. You will find what you need.
So they're nonprofit, obviously. Yeah.
They're absolutely a
And they're
nonprofit.
located in New Hampshire.
So the Alzheimer's Association has been around for a while. It is a national organization divided into state chapters.
Okay.
So our state chapter it's a joint one, Massachusetts and New Hampshire. And so we operate that way, but our programs that we're offering here are pretty much the same programs that are going to be offered anywhere. But here's the interesting part about it, is this 24/7 line is also multilingual. So if you're calling and you're a Chinese or a Japanese speaker, they will put you in touch with a Chinese or Japanese speaker. Or Hispanic communities, you're going to get tailored to you the kind of program that is culturally specific and it works for you and for your community. And that's really important because these are very intimate and very family-based, hard things to work through. So you need to make sure that you are providing the right framework for people to dig into.
It's interesting. I think one of the things I brought up, it caught my ear and during the committee, was the making of the awareness. I don't know what the training is for our first responders.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit in that has been one of the longtime goals of the Alzheimer's Association. And so they have run first responder trainings annually that increasingly go further and further out to try to cover the entire state. I believe that they're almost all Zoom, which you think about it makes some sense if you're dealing with folks in the firehouse who have erratic schedules.
Right.
They can access it at a time when they can access it. So I think we have made good progress in that regard about have we actually completely covered the state? I'm not sure. I know one of the local hospitals down in this part of the state was very much involved in sponsoring this. So this is something that I think everybody realizes that we need to have an informed first responder community. And even, for example, encouraging families to let their local law enforcement know about if they've got somebody in their family who is suffering from at some level with Alzheimer's or some other dementia, to let them know, so that if somebody needs to come to their house, or if their loved one is wandering, which can be a very scary and terrifying piece of this disease, that you've got people already alert, already thinking about that person as a person and the family, and not just responding ad hoc. So it's trying to build some safety rails to protect the family and protect the person who's clearly impaired.
So what are the don't do's?
So there are lots of don't do's and there are lots of do's. I mean, rather than thinking about the person for what their deficits, think about them in terms of the positives, and think about how you would like to be treated, realizing that a person who's got some form of Alzheimer's or another dementia may not be cognitively seeing things or understanding things the way you might. So repeating yourself or raising your voice the way people used to do with hearing loss. I'll just raise my voice and they'll understand. Or, you know what I mean, or you remember that. Well, if they remembered that, then probably they wouldn't be asking the same question over and over. They're not trying to be difficult. It's not a matter of reasoning. There is a gap. There's a synapse gap, there's a neural gap in their brain that is preventing one piece of information getting to another piece of information and processing. So if you see that from a point of view of empathy and compassion, and you understand, be kind, be gentle, be encouraging, and realize that there's a lot of fear going on here. So try to be as supportive as you can be. And that is not only true with the person with the disease, it's also true with caregivers who are often like, a lot of times you're quite right that they hide themselves. They feel embarrassment. They don't know how to handle this. It's a disease. These are diseases. These are not attitudes. These are diseases. Nobody wants to be in this predicament, but be supportive. If you see a caregiver out with their person, their loved one, who are trying to make it work in a restaurant, give them a high five. Just tell them, great, good job, and thank you, and smile. I had people ask me, well, should I say hello to your husband? And I'm thinking, well, that's the craziest question I've ever heard. But I thought, but that comes, so I would say, yeah, do that. Just give them a smile, say hello. So it's just, it as much as anything, it's changing our attitudes. We've done it before with other diseases. We used to lock lots of diseases up and think, we don't want to see it, we don't want to deal with it. Well, we found that that's not the best way to work things through.
Yeah, I think another thing that we discovered is that there are some closings going on as far as care, daycares. That's another area for people to be concerned about. Some people, I think of one case where they brought their loved one to the emergency room. That wasn't necessarily the best way to do it.
It's a very, very common story. And if you talk to any hospital, they will tell you that this is the thing that it's frustrating to everybody concerned. And if you think of it, the family is calling the doctor because they don't know what to do. The doctor doesn't know what to do. So they don't have a magic bullet either, right? They're perhaps behaviors is what it's usually called. Something's happening with that person that they're very uncomfortable and they're making life very difficult for themselves and their caregiving family. So they ended up going to the emergency room, and the emergency room is, Dartmouth Health now has a geriatric emergency center, which is really tailored for older folks and particularly works for dementia. But if you think about your experience in the emergency department, it's noisy, it's confusing, it's lights, and it's people in and out and in and out. It's all those sort of things that oftentimes will trigger somebody with dementia. So that's not a good place for them to be, and having them hospitalized when there's not a medical condition that can actually, it's not the best use of our resources. So finding other ways to have people who are trained, caregivers who are trained, family members who are trained, but also support people who are trained to help navigate those difficult times.
Yeah, interesting. And that hotline is something that can help guide you.
Yes, and yes, absolutely. That 24/7 line is a 24/7 line. There is, no matter what the question, call and ask for help. And the other thing that I want to reiterate here is, when you begin on this journey, and you're a little bit like a deer with headlights, just stunned. Where do I go? What do I do? And it feels like a very insurmountable task that you've been given. The truth is that there are a lot of people out here, and there's a lot of support. There's a lot of peer support from others, and that's another thing that I will say that I benefited from with the Alzheimer's Association. There are support groups. So peer-to-peer, I could be talking to other caregivers, and we could be talking by phone because I can't leave my loved one, or we could be talking by Zoom. There are also support groups for people in the early stages of the disease who want to talk with each other, and which they should do. I mean, imagine what they're going through, thinking about. So there's support groups for people with younger onset, which was the case in my family's case, and people who are taking care of their older parents. So
yeah, nobody thinks about 50 years old.
No, but it's more prevalent than you think. If you think about some of the cases that you've recently heard about, some of these other dementias, celebrities and so forth, it's not uncommon. It's rarer.
Bruce Willis.
Bruce Willis has frontotemporal disease, absolutely.
Wow.
Robin Williams had Lewy body disease.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And the list goes on and on. I mean, you're not immune by being, nobody's immune. These are brain diseases that actually happen to people. And some of these other dementias actually start a little bit younger. One of the things that I like to ask people to think about is that this used to be talked about and thought of as an older person's disease. Right. The truth is that it tends to emerge mostly in later life, right? That's more typically the case. But the precursors begin way earlier, could be 20 years earlier, in your 40s, in your late 30s. It's subclinical. You don't have any symptoms. The symptoms don't actually appear until 20 years later. What we're doing with research now is it's a little bit like HIV. We're being able to determine what's going on through blood biomarkers so that we can prevent the further development of the disease. We're not there yet, but we will be there eventually. The point is that just because you don't have symptoms today doesn't mean that you won't have symptoms in 20 years. And it's certainly not a disease that is about age. It's just a disease that finally surfaces when you get to it.
Is it usually gradual, or can it be just like a breaker switch going off?
I think, I'm not a medical person. I follow this stuff, but I think it kind of depends on what we're talking about, which of these various dementias. Mm-hmm. Generally speaking, it seems to be slower, and that's one of the challenges is of identifying, this is something going on with this person. Their mood, I'm seeing mood changes. I'm seeing inability to do things that they used to do. I'm seeing some changes with their language and with their writing. I'm seeing difficulty in organizing activities that they used to be just good. So it's not as simple as saying, my memory is gone. It's a whole constellation of their actual 10 factors, 10 warning signs. And again, you can go to alz.org, which is the Alzheimer's Association. And look them up there. There's a whole education piece there, or go on the 24/7. And those are kind of the beginning point to say, wait a minute, there might be something happening. And that can begin a conversation with your loved one to say, I noticed that you're having some trouble. Remember when you lost your car last week? I mean, that seemed, and I think maybe you lost your car a couple of weeks ago. I mean, is this something that we should talk about? And to find a way to begin talking about it that doesn't feel accusatory, that doesn't feel threatening, that feels like, how can we problem solve this? How can we work through this?
You know, my wife and I came back from Utah a few weeks back. We landed at Logan, and we parked at Logan.
And you couldn't remember? Wow.
Oh my good! It was at least an hour and a half to try to find our car, and I'm thinking, okay, I can hear it. But I mean that I don't know if that's an early sign, but I just didn't think that we had to remember. Yeah, you parked at D3.
So that's the sensitivity here, is that there's normal aging. Yes, yeah, we all forget stuff, right? Mm-hmm. We all forget stuff. But they're sort of the next level up of cognitive functioning, where we can't quite organize and plan and remember things in quite the way we did. So, for example, where did I put my keys? I lose my keys all the time, right? But the difference is that I can kind of retrace my steps. Okay, I came in, I did this, and I can usually backtrack.
Right.
I'm going to find my keys. But if I put my keys in the refrigerator, that might be a sign that maybe that wasn't such a good thing after all. Right? Or, okay, so I was late in paying that bill. Oh dear, my life got very complicated and busy. But that's different than maybe just not quite being able to be on top of managing all of your bills and thinking. So we shouldn't be frightened by normal aging,
right? But
we need to be attentive, I think, to.
So what is the number again?
So the number is, I'm going to read it right here to you, 800-272-3900.
And with that, we're going to thank you very much for coming on the show. I know that's a drive, but we appreciate you coming, and hopefully we can make more awareness for folks if they need help. And if you find yourself in a situation where you just don't know what to do, it's like being in a dark room, not knowing where the handle is. And so this is a lifeline that we're throwing, and hopefully this is a help to you out there. So with that, we thank you for coming on the show, Kathy Harvard.
Thank you very much for doing this. I know there are a lot of people out there watching who are going to be very appreciative that you have raised this and you're getting the conversation going. Thank you.
And with that, thank you for watching Speaking with the Senator. And if you have something that you'd like to talk about on the show, we'd love to have you come on the show and share your experience or your 501c3 or whatever topic that you'd like. Until next week, thanks for watching.